All right, guys, it's Carson. How are we doing tonight? I just wanted to hop on here and have a very nonchalant conversation about Star Citizen and whether or not you should purchase. I have a lot of polarizing thoughts about this game. I have a lot of positive thoughts about this game. I have a lot of negative thoughts about this game. But ultimately, I just want to talk candidly about whether or not you should purchase Star Citizen going into 2023 and what that kind of new player experience would look like and what you can expect. And I also want to talk about some things that some people, some YouTubers in particular, and some fanboys will not tell you about the game and things you should know before you get into it, before you commit your cold hard cash. It's really hard these days with all the inflation and stuff. So I really just want to get on here and kind of just talk about what you can expect candidly. This is not even scripted. I have some thoughts. I'm going to lay them out there, and then we're going to have a conversation. All right, so let's start off with, should you get into Star Citizen? The short answer, I think, is yes. I have a lot of fun with the game. I'm very committed to it. I've been following the development for years now. If you guys look at the channel, I made a video 3 years ago discussing whether or not I think you should purchase the game. At the time, I had some concerns, some thoughts. The audio is terrible. And so this is just kind of my remade version 3 years later, almost to the day. So, sorry, I got an email and it vibrated and I had to cut the clip. Anyways, my bad. Back to Star Citizen. To keep it brief, I think you should purchase this game. The time I made that video, the original video 3 years ago, one of my primary concerns in that video was that prices in the game for ships were so high that you would need to spend hundreds to get into the game. I'm happy to report that today that's not true. I really do think that a starter package is enough to at least get you going. And I've also encountered a lot of players who are incredibly generous with their currency in the game, because a lot of us people who've been playing for years or play patch cycles, a few hours a day, the currency just racks up. I actually recently gave away millions upon millions of credits, and I'm down like 500k, but three sets in next week, so who cares? But I'm happy to say that this idea that you would need to spend hundreds of dollars to get into Star Citizen to even play the game is no longer true. It's certainly not. If you get the intro package for $40 with your Aurora MR, I don't think that's the best ship in the game, but it certainly is enough to get you where you need to go eventually. And I think for a bit more money, if you spend, maybe on an Avenger Titan, you can do a bit more combat stuff and kind of accelerate your progression there in terms of currency. But you certainly don't need to drop hundreds on the game. Versus before, there was this narrative of, you can technically buy everything in game, so you don't really need to spend all the money. That was certainly not true at the time. Because stuff was ridiculous, right? Like missions were paying 2,000 credits and ships were millions of credits. So I'm happy to report that has certainly changed. Another thing to consider if you're going to get into this game is your computer. You need to have a pretty beefy PC to run this thing. It historically has just run like dog shit, and it still kind of does run like dog shit. I think you guys will notice a lot of frame drops in this video, and I am on a very beefy PC. I don't have a 4000 series yet, but I do have a 380 or 3080, sorry. And this thing it chews up my PC regardless of how nice the equipment is. So that's kind of always been a thing. It's certainly getting better. And with 318, which is about to come out probably next week, the new renderer is said to improve performance quite a bit. But I guess we'll see. I think a lot of it's server side opposed to like client side and performance issues. But that's certainly something to consider too. If you're on like a potato PC or a PC from 2012, I really don't think this is the game for you, and I really don't want you to spend money just to find out that you can't even run it. Another thing I want to address and quickly dispel is the idea that Star Citizen is never releasing or not making any progress. That was certainly true for a time. We did have like a glorified tech demo for years, but even looking back at that video I made a few years ago, so much has changed, and there's a lot of content being added throughout the years, and we have planets now, and there's moons, and there's a lot of missions, and there's several well-defined gameplay loops opposed to just flying around Port Olisar, just being dickheads crashing into each other. There's a lot more going on now these days. There's quite a few missions. Cargo hauling has a decent loop. There's medical gameplay. There's even prison gameplay for when you commit a crime and you go to jail. There's a gameplay loop for that. There's like mini games. There's mining, and there's like people have started racing because there's various racing places around the verse. There's PvP bounties and there's PvE bounties, and there's all these fun ways to get rid of your crime stat by like sneaking into like security posts and hacking into things. And there's certainly a lot of activities. And there's also a lot of ships. I think for a while we, actually no, I think the ship's release schedule has been pretty consistent the entire time, but it just has grown to the point where we have like over 120 ships in the game. And let's just say like a dozen, maybe a few more ground vehicles. So there's a lot of content there. There's a lot of stuff going on there, and the game is certainly progressing. Is it progressing slowly? Fuck yeah, it's very slow. Our progression is insanely slow. 3.18, ideally. Like, I remember right before CitizenCon, maybe over the summer, we discussed, not we, but like the community was discussing and CIG was discussing potentially having 4.0 and Eva Cardi by the end of December. We don't even have 3.18. God forbid we have 3.19, which I don't even know is happening anymore. We just got to skip it. Who the hell knows? And after that comes 4.0 and Pyro, which apparently is no longer even in active development because the technology isn't even there yet to implement the star system. So there certainly are delays upon delays upon delays, and CIG can fail to communicate in a lot of regards. But in terms of, is there progress being made in the game? Is this game actually being developed, or is it a giant scam? It's certainly not. There's certainly progress being made. Things are being added. Bugs are being fixed all the time. So that's another thing that I just wanted to dispel and kind of address. But that being said, I think it's also worth noting you're essentially just continuing the fundraising course. So what you're buying into, if you buy into this game, you're buying into an alpha. It's very buggy. A lot of things happen in this footage. I don't think this video will be long enough to get to it, but you will see that my ship like clips into the ground, bonks me on the head, and knocks me out, and I died. So that's unfortunate. There are all sorts of bugs all the time. Server disconnections are called 30Ks. They're famous because typically there's like a lead up to it, like buttons on elevators will stop working, and then everyone in the chat's like 30K, 30K, disconnected. So it happens. You know what I mean? There's a lot of bugs in this game. But I think that's kind of part of the ride, and it's also part of the fun. Continuing on with development, now this would be a great time to tell you about the server wipes and the gameplay wipes. Not every patch, but every now and then, server backlog technology advances to a point where they need to wipe the servers completely, wipe gameplay progression, restart everything, and just clean slate. This is about to happen with 3.18, so if you're about to get into the game, you might want to wait a week or so. But basically, they wipe everything. Sometimes they wipe purchases and like things around the verse without touching your currency, or without touching your reputation. So your missions don't reset. Sometimes they have a full wipe where everything resets and everyone starts from scratch with the ships that you bought with real money. Meaning, if you grind for hours and hours and hours to buy an 890 jump, which is I think 32 million UEC in game, and then the servers reset, you will no longer have that. So it's certainly something to consider in the sense that if you have a starter package that has a really small ship, every time there's a server wipe, which isn't that often, you're going to have to restart, and you unfortunately are going to have to go through that process of grinding up again. I guess you can say the only plus side of this is with every major patch when this is occurring, there's typically, or there at least should be, some sort of gameplay loop associated with that. And I guess in that sense, you at least will have more to do when you're grinding your way back up. But that's something new players should know for sure. It's buggy and there are server wipes. I see people all the time who are in chat like, I feel scammed, this game is buggy as hell. Well, it has good days and bad days for sure. Sometimes it's 30K, 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 30K. I just get off. And then some days it runs. It just works. So it really depends in that regard. And that's something I don't think CIG does a very good job at conveying to you. They're like, oh, it's an alpha. What does that mean? They make you agree to something like, oh, you're buying into, this is a pledge, this is not a fully developed product. What does that even mean? You know what I mean? Unless you're reading it all, and no one's reading it all. There's going to be some guy in the comments like, well, I think it's an alpha, so bugs are okay. It's pretty game breaking sometimes, and it's certainly acceptable provided the state of the game, but I don't think they're very concise and very clear in the fact that this is a buggy mess sometimes, and perhaps some days it won't even operate well. So that's something to be aware of for sure. Something else I'd like to cover in this section very briefly is the CIG FOMO, as I'd like to call it. When you consider getting into this game, I think there needs to be a conversation with oneself, maybe a moment of self-reflection where you sit down and you say, I will not spend more than $100 in this video game, because a lot of us, the average backer, has spent so much money on this game, it's disgusting. And part of that is because CIG does this thing where they're like, announce a concept ship and they'll hype it and they'll hype it and they'll hype it and be like, limited time only, limited time only. And we all know they're going to raise the price on it later. So what do? You buy it. Terrible choice. Almost never works out. Don't do it. Half the time the concept ships are still in development. Some of them have been there for years. People who bought the Endeavor, people like me who bought the Merchantman, we're literally waiting 10 years later at this point, 7, 8, 9 years later. It's ridiculous. So FOMO hype, they're going to try to take advantage of you. Don't let them. Okay, don't let them. They're going to be like, hey guys, this week in Star Citizen Live, we're looking at. Sorry, I'm sounding like Jared Huckabee. Jared does a great job, by the way. I understand he doesn't dictate the company and he doesn't make the policies and he's not making ships, but he is the unfortunate, he's the face of this. So he's the one I'm going to mock here. But, he'll be like, hey guys, this week in Star Citizen, we looked at the new Banu Merchantman rework. And suddenly you want it, right? You saw it. Guess what? Last week, 2 weeks ago, pretty much they said Banu Merchantman no longer in active development. I guess we'll wait another few years, right? But they really get you sometimes with hyping you up for gameplay features or for ships that are so many years out. So just be aware of that too. If you're gonna buy Star Citizen, they might try to do that, and it's a little deceptive in the sense that some of these ships are years and years and years out, and I'm sure they'll arrive at some point, but I don't see it yet. I think that's kind of it for my giant list of warnings and preferences. So with that being said, who is this game for? Star Citizen is for a patient person who wants to support a project that isn't completely done and have a pretty good game in the meantime. The community is thriving. The servers are always packed. There's always chats going on. People are very kind. Generally, obviously, you always have pirates and trolls, but generally people are very kind and very supportive. And it's a very active and devoted fan base. Which obviously comes with its pros and cons in its own way. You'll never have a truly peaceful experience hauling, millions of credits worth of cargo, but at the same time, you'll always be surrounded by people, or you'll see people at landing zones. They're flying around and they're talking in chat. It's very active in that sense. So I think the person who should buy Star Citizen going into 2023 is someone who looks at everything that I have talked about and says, you know what, I'm okay with that baggage. They've watched gameplay. They know what ship they can afford and how they're going to prevent themselves from spending thousands of dollars in the game. And they're ready to hop in and not immediately feel scammed. I think it's really important to have transparency, and I think videos like this and videos other people have made about the topic is relevant to the community, and I think it's relevant to new players to understand exactly what they're getting into, because especially here on YouTube, there's a lot of one-off tutorial videos, but generally the content creation is centered towards people who are already in the community. There's not a lot of content creation for new players. So I really hope you guys maybe found some value in this video. If you have watched all of this and you decide that it is worth your time and your money to invest in this game, then I will drop my referral code in the description. The Luminalia event is going on right now, and if you use my referral code, we will both get an MPUV Argo vehicle. And anyone else who uses my referral code besides the first person will also get one as well. So if you're going to sign up for the game, use someone's referral code. You don't need to use mine, maybe use a friend's or whoever's, but make sure you get that free ship while the event is still going on, because it's kind of just a free vehicle. So you might as well. Beyond that, I am thinking of potentially starting an org or maybe a Discord to kind of have our own little community. It seems like the most of the fun from Star Citizen these days, from people who have played it for a while, comes from the community. So I would love to have a little space where we can all chat and just have a good time. So I'll look into that. But if you're new to the game, or you're looking to get into the game, I hope this video helped you. And if you have any questions, drop them below. I'll be more than happy to answer things. And that's all. See you in the verse.